This first rule applies when we have only part of a group that is missing and needs to be filled up with the rest. So, most basic example here, we've got 4 crotchet groups in this one. And we can see that it's the second group that's missing some notes in it or some rests in it. So in this case, we have to just match it. And what I mean by that is right now it's a quaver. So it has to be followed with a quaver rest. And that's what we call matching, or what I call matching. I don't know what it's actually called. If I make that just a little bit trickier by turning it into a semi-quaver, now we've got only a quarter of this group completed so far. And so I'm not allowed to just fill up the rest of this space here with a rest that's worth 3/4 because you're not allowed to have a rest bigger than the note. And so we have to match it first with another quarter. And now that it has been matched, it adds up to a half and will be treated just as a half. I can now add another half on. So you match it first, then you complete the rest of the group. If we take a look at the same thing, but with 4 minim groups rather than 4 crotchets, it's exactly the same thing that happens. 4 minim groups here. And if one of them had only a crotchet in there, it's missing another crotchet now, so it would need to be matched with a crotchet. But if it was just a bit smaller than that, a quaver maybe, well, we have 1.5 beats now missing in here. I can't just fill that up with one rest. I have to match it first, and then I would complete the group with the remaining crotchet to make it up to a minim. So you just keep matching until you reach the total value of that group. Theoretically, if this was like really small, don't worry, you're very, very unlikely to see that in a test. You would have to match it, and then you would just keep getting bigger, with one less tail each time until the bar was completed. I'm not going to keep going, but you get the point. That's kind of the logic behind how matching works. You just have to keep on matching. This next section is all to do with overlapping, and there are a few elements to do with this. And the first one is that you are never allowed to overlap the center of your bar when adding rests. And obviously, not all bars have a center point like that can be split. So, for example, 3/4, 3 crotchet groups, you can't split that down the middle. So this applies to the bars that can be split evenly down the middle. Okay, so let's just put that into practice then. So if I was missing this crotchet and this one, and I had to fill that space up with a missing rest or rests, I couldn't simplify those 2 crotchet rests into a 2-beat rest. They would have to be split so that we didn't overlap the middle bit. And that's probably popped up in your music from time to time. You've probably seen 2 rests, one after the other like that, and thought, why did they not just simplify that? Well, this is why. However, if my 2 beats are missing from the end of the bar or from the beginning of the bar, then I'm allowed to simplify it and I don't have to use 2 individual crotchet rests. So simplifying rests can be done as long as it's an entire half of the bar that is missing. Okay, so if we just apply that then to a few different time sigs, let's say, let's pick a totally different one, 6/8, where I've got bunches of 3s, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. That does have a center point, so I wouldn't be allowed to overlap there. But if the whole half of the bar was missing, I use a dotted crotchet rest to fill that space. Let's use a slightly larger bar, 12/8. Now I have 4 groups of 3. Okay, so again, there is a center point, should never be overlapped. But if I was missing those final 2 groups there, well, that group was a dotted crotchet and that one was a dotted crotchet, but I could simplify both of those into a dotted minim. That would be allowed. For all other time signatures, like the one we saw before, like 3, 4, that don't have a halfway point for the bar, you should just treat each group individually, and the overlapping should never happen between those groups. So if I was missing these two, they would just have to be crotchet groups, and you could not simplify them. Or for example, 9, 8, where again, I've got 3 groups here. This cannot be split down the middle. So each and every group has to be treated individually, and no overlapping can happen between them. So that would be a dotted crotchet there, as would that. So I'm not allowed to simplify in this case. This final rule only applies to compound time signatures, and those are the ones that are grouped into threes, like this one is here. If we take a closer look at one of those groups, just focus on this group here, because there's an uneven amount of notes in here, we have to think of it as a strong beat and a weak beat. It's like the first portion of these quavers has been given slightly more importance than the final beat at the end. So that is your strong beat and that is your weak beat. And where this comes into play with rests is if I have only a part of this group completed, let's say I only have one quaver complete from the group, and the rest of it is filled in with rests, I have to first of all think about finishing off the strong beat, which I need another quaver for, and then completing the weak beat afterwards. So in this case, I've had to split. I didn't just add a crotchet rest in at the end, I had to split it into 2 quavers. And I know this kind of still loosely follows the matching rule from earlier, where we sort of match the note and then we finish the rest of the group. But it gets a little bit deeper than that. So let's say instead, I only had this note here at the end instead of the beginning. Still only have a quaver of this group, but it's at the end. It's the weak beat that I've got. So now if I wanted to finish this group off, I don't have to do 2 individual quaver rests like this. This is one of the only times you'll ever see this happening. So it's really important to know about it. So if I have all of the strong beat missing like that, I can simplify it into 1 crotchet. Because although it's in the same group, it doesn't follow the matching rule because of the subdivision here. This is kind of like a separate thing, even though it's inside the same group. So I can use 1 to fill all of this in and 1 to fill all of this in. They kind of follow their own rules in either side. So yeah, in this case, yes, strong beat, weak beat, 1.5. Okay, so let's apply that to a different time signature that is also in threes. Let's just say I keep that there. Instead of 9, 8, let's change this to 9, 16. Okay, so 9, 16. Again, there's still 9 things in here, except they're all semiquavers now. Because it's in threes, I still have a strong and a weak beat to deal with. So there's my strong beat, there's my weak beat. And it's just a case that they're now semiquavers instead of quavers. So let's just do the same thing as before. Let's say I only had a semiquaver, sorry, at the start of my group, and I'm missing the final 2 semiquavers. I have to split them up into the 2 individual semiquavers. But if that semiquaver was at the end of that group, now because I'm missing an entire strong beat of this group, I can simplify those 2 semiquavers into 1 quaver rest. Okay, so we'll take that rule and apply it to this last time signature. This is another compound time sig, 9, 4. So we've still got a 9 at the top. We've just got a 4 at the bottom instead. So we have 9 crotchets instead. And so the ones we just looked at were a bit easier to distinguish where the groups were because they have beams along the top. But crotchets, because they're sort of standalone and they don't beam to other notes, it's harder to know where the groups are, but you just have to remember that anything with 6, 9, or 12 on the top, they are in blocks of 3. So although you can't see them, the groups are actually there like this. And so if I was to fill in 1 rest for 1 group, it's quite large, so I'd have to use a dotted minim because that adds up to 3, doesn't it, in there? 3 crotchets equals a dotted minim's worth of notes. So one rest in one group would be just a dotted minim rest. But if we think of the strong and the weak beat thing like before, and we just take this group here and apply it. So there's my strong beat and there's my weak beat. If I only had one little crotchet out of this group, then I'd need to split that into two crotchets for the remaining part of the group. But if I had the crotchet at the end of the group, now I can simplify and use a minim. Just a few final points. The 4-beat rest that you have is used as a 4-beat rest, but it's usually a whole bar rest as well. So even though this is technically a 4-count rest, you can use it to fill an entire bar, no matter how many beats are in that bar. Even if, let's say, you've got a small bar like 2/4, and the whole bar is empty and we need to fill it up with a rest, instead of using a 2-beat rest, like you instinctively might want to, it's always the whole bar rest. The only time when this doesn't apply is to this time signature here. It's the largest time signature that you need to know about, 4 minims. Okay, so if you think about that, that's actually 8 crotchets worth of notes here, isn't it? And so instead of a 4-beat rest filling up the entire bar, we use a breathe rest, and I will draw the whole stave out for this one so we can see it. It's like a 4-beat rest and a 2-beat rest combined. It kind of ends up merging the whole gap together like that. And that is worth 8 crotchet beats. And so that's the only time we will use a different rest when filling up a whole bar. This is called the breathe rest.